Hello again, Guyana, and welcome to this week's edition of The Public Interest. I'm Malaika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us. As always on the program is the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Brigadier David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Malaika.
And joining us this week are two journalists, of course, Miss Anadia Holladar from the National Communications Network, NCN. Welcome, Anadia.
Thank you, Malaika.
And of course, Mr. Godfrey Broomes from MTV News Update. Welcome, Godfrey.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. Now, this week's edition is designed to focus on the importance of restoring interest and pride in communities. Your Excellency, over the years, people have somewhat moved away from community life. Some of them basically just go home to sleep there. Local government elections aside, does your government have a plan to ensure that interest and pride and so on is restored in community life, to get people to somewhat invest more in their communities?
Yes, indeed, we have a plan. You might have heard the Minister of Communities. Well, in fact, the very reason that we changed the name of the Ministry of Local Government to Ministry of Communities is to emphasize the importance of communities. Minister Ronald Bulkan has announced something called a PARD, a Plan of Action for Regional Development. And each region will have a plan, mostly to develop the economy, to improve the administration. And this again would emphasize the importance of communities within those regions. Local government elections are important, but the regional elections, as you know, come along with the general and regional elections, which were held last 11th of May. But we want to strengthen the regions, and that is one of the reasons why we're creating 3 new towns at Mabaruma, Bartica, and Letham. And we want people to feel pride in their regions. But from another point of view, we've discovered that a lot of crime and social problems have started to arise out of the communities. Suicide, murders, sometimes some rape murders of old women, arson, all sorts of serious social problems have arisen in some of the communities. So it is not just a governmental measure, it's also a social measure to improve the quality of life in these communities. So that is our focus, and we are walking on 2 legs. Not only do we have a governmental approach to strengthen the region, but we also have a social approach. And again, if I could add, that's one of the reasons why we created 2 new ministries, or gave the new names to ministries, Ministry of Social Cohesion and Social Protection. So social is an important dimension of our development policy. I'm sorry to be so long-winded, but it's a very important question you started off with.
Sir, just before I move on to the other journalists, do you believe that promoting small-scale farming in some of these communities will support the initiative?
Yes, indeed. We are looking to promote not only small-scale farming, but also small-scale processing, what we call processing, so that we can produce even commodities like, ketchup or peanut butter, cassava bread, guava jam, guava cheese. These are things which can be done at a small scale. So it means that within a community, within a village, people may be able to produce, to grow guava plants and produce guavas to make guava jam, guava jelly, guava cheese, and so on. So farming is an important element in our economic turnaround for those communities and villages. And we hope that from farming, we take a step forward to agro-processing and towards packaging and exporting commodities. That is part of the plan.
Thank you, sir. And Nadia, you're free to pose your question on the topic.
Mr. President, what are some of the ways in which the government will be working with NGOs and religious bodies to ensure that the true spirit of communitarianism is enhanced in the communities?
Well, I think there are 2 levels. One, of course, is the question of the attitude, the behavior, the conduct of people within these communities. And in this regard, I think that the churches have an important role to play. The mandirs, the masjids have an important role to play in counseling young people and in helping to keep more of them in schools. And as you know, Guyana was built on church schools, but in the 70s, many of the schools were maybe secularized. They were made government schools. And I would encourage the churches and the school and the other religious bodies, the mandirs, the masjids, to promote education. And quite frankly, now you've got Catholic school at Marian Academy, you've got SVN on the West Coast, Demerara, more or less a Hindu school. You've got Islamic school in East Street, Georgetown. So that is one way. The other NGOs, I would encourage them, you know, those like the Rotary, Lions, and other NGOs, to look at the problems arising in these communities. Let us deal with real problems like suicide, poverty, homelessness. And I think I would like to, in answering your question, like to encourage them to direct their attention to actual social problems in those communities. If there's suicide, I would like to know the answer. It is not a job for the government alone, because some of the problems may have a social origin. So I would say that for the religious religious bodies, I would like to see them more directly involved in education. And for the other NGOs, I'd like to see them more involved in helping the government to resolve social problems, you know, like suicide and also, you know, crime prevention and that type of thing, you know. Solving poverty, solving destitution, solving school dropouts and these other problems. So there's a lot that we can do together, the government and NGOs, particularly religious bodies.
Okay, Godfrey?
Sir, you spoke of the role of the NGOs and the religious bodies, but what role will the government play in restoring these communities?
Well, we are doing our best. As you know, when the APNU and AFC were in the opposition, we had called for the holding of local government elections by the 1st of August 2014. This has not happened. And we are now in office, and we have worked, and within a few weeks' time we will be having local government elections. So that's the first step that the government has taken. We want to see strong local governments in terms of the neighborhoods and also the strong municipalities. That's why we've created, as I said before, new towns. But in addition to that, we are working through our ministries, particularly social cohesion and social protection, to strengthen social institutions and to deliver public services in the schools. For example, in education, we feel that one of the problems creating a large number of unemployed youths is the fact that many of them drop out of school. You know, primary and secondary school, we've got over 4,000 dropouts every year. So one of the ways we're combating dropout problems is by providing transport and by providing also school meals and school uniforms to keep children in school. So in the end, we expect that the combination of governmental action plus stronger neighborhood and municipal administrations will help to turn these communities around. That's what the government is doing, working with the NGOs, but we are doing work on our own. But some of the social problems cannot be solved by governmental action alone.
Anadia, you're free to continue.
In the past, everyone would have looked out for each other, and when the system started breaking down, then it was felt that many of the social issues, including crime, rose. Do you believe that the love and camaraderie among residents of the community can be restored, and how so?
It's going to be difficult because a lot of the problems in the communities arose out of inequalities. When you have largely unequal societies, you know, the very rich and the extremely poor, it's difficult for there not to be discrimination. And what we're trying to do in the government is to reduce those inequalities. If all the children in the community, for example, got the opportunity to go to school and they qualified at CXC, at CAPE, there would be fewer inequalities and there'd be more camaraderie. So that is one of the areas that we feel that education could be the great equalizer. And that's why we want every child to be given a place in school. And even if the child has problems with transportation or meals, we try to ensure that child gets to school. So our approach is the removal of inequalities, not try to destroy people's wealth or their status or position in society, but to ensure that everybody gets equal access to public services. Housing, that's another important area, and what has happened in some communities over the last 2 decades or so is that crime has infiltrated, and the type of crime that came in was associated with the narcotics trade. And once you have narcotics penetrating community, there's going to be violence. And that violence was triggered, or maybe I would say, given a more intense form to gun running. So we discovered a lot of execution murders. So in some small communities, we noticed over the last 10 years or so, there have been some very serious execution murders. Equally, there have been problems in some rural communities in which old women, widows living on their own, have been raped and murdered. So there's a lot of work that we have to do in order to create that atmosphere of camaraderie. And so we come back to the initial question, that is, what can the community do? There is something called community policing, and we want to give community policing a new emphasis, so that if a community is aware that there are vulnerable children in the community, young girls, schoolgirls. Remember, we had a very bad rape murder at Wackenham. If we know that there are widows living on their own, the community could help the police to take responsibility for the safety, the human safety of those vulnerable citizens. So it is going to be a long way up, but we know what we're doing, and right now, although there is an acceptable level of crime, there is a very noticeable rate at which those crimes are being solved. Sometimes you'd hear about an attack or an armed robbery, and within a day or two, the police force is able to track down persons. Even some cold cases like the murder of those children at King and Rob Street, when they were burnt by fire, which is deliberately set in the building. Finally, we're getting answers, and I would like to commend the police force on solving those problems. And once we can do that, I feel we'll have safer communities, happier communities, loving communities, to use your words.
The final question for this segment will come from you, Godfrey.
Okay, sir. Is there any measure in the pipeline to strengthen the community policing groups?
Well, I would say that there's no physical measure, but there's a conceptual measure, in the sense that community policing groups over the last 20 years have been used like vigilantes. You see them in their T-shirts, and they have handcuffs and batons, and they be given SUVs. That's not community policing. Community policing is really a relationship between the community and the police. Policing is the job of the Guyana Police Force. And if we build up a better relationship between the community and the regular police force, then we will start to solve the crime problems. There's no point creating a rival police force called the CPGs. So the measure that is in place is to change the quality of the relationship between the community and the police. Not to create two police forces, one controlled by the Ministry of Home Affairs, one controlled by the Commissioner of Police. The Commissioner of Police is responsible, and we will strengthen his authority over community policing, which is a function of the community working together with the police. So that is the main measure.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, you're now free to pose questions outside of the initial topic. Beginning with you this time, Anadia.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Wednesday of next week will be 50 years since the Geneva Agreement was signed, and Venezuela is still to prove her claims. Your thoughts on this?
Well, Venezuela never proved its claim, because the claim has gone to arbitration, as you know, in 1899. And Venezuela was awarded over, I think, nearly 15,000 square kilometers of territory, land about the size of Jamaica. So Venezuela has already gotten everything that it's ever going to get. What Venezuela is doing, or has done for the last 50 years, is advance a false claim, a bogus claim, to more territory. And we decided to go to court. So I know it's the 50th anniversary of the Geneva Agreement, but the Geneva Agreement never attempted to overturn the decisions of the 1899 tribunal. That is held up in international law, and we want to go to the courts to prove it. So the anniversary is very significant for me, for all Guyanese, but we must reaffirm our nation's territorial integrity. I am seeking a meeting with the United Nations to ensure that this message is gotten across. So I've already written on a couple of occasions to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and this is our message, that we are in the right, and we are going to go to court to prove that we are in the right so that our children could inherit the land.
Godfrey.
Sir, citing other sections of society have embraced the opposition's claim of the 2016 budget being anti-poor and anti-development, such as the Auto Dealers Association. How do you respond to this?
Well, every public, there are several publics in Guyana, every public has a right to represent its own interests, and the auto dealers, probably express concern because they feel their profits would be affected. But the government has to think about the whole country. And the point is that when you bring in old vehicles or old tires or old equipment, that equipment is less efficient, it pollutes the atmosphere, it is more costly because it requires more maintenance or more spare parts, and you get less life out of it. As a result of that, our environment suffers, our people suffer, and we are always going to be on a sort of treadmill trying to replace old equipment. New equipment lasts longer. And we don't want developed countries to treat us like a junkyard, sending their junk which they can't use themselves. They are not going to put up with it because it's inefficient and smoky. Why should we put up with it? So I'm not saying that the auto dealers don't have their interests to protect, but I have the national interest to protect. They have a personal interest to protect.
Anadia.
Your Excellency, since you've become president, you've embarked on quite a busy schedule. On a lighter note, what keeps you motivated?
My busy schedule. The national interest, by going around to various communities, going up the rivers, I keep learning all the time. I keep learning from the people, I gain experiences, and that is what drives me, that is what drives policy. When I see, when I go to a school in Akawini or, at Ramadan, then I see what the problems are. And I can come back and discuss solutions with my ministers. I'm interested in solutions. If I go to the maternity ward at the Georgetown Public Hospital on Christmas morning, I see a problem, and the Minister of Public Health is going to hear from me. Let's see how we can sit down and solve the problem. If I see a large number of suicides, my concern is to find solutions to those problems. So I'm constantly driven by what I would call the public interest, that how best could we serve the public? And as long as there are problems, I keep going out, I keep meeting and speaking with people and working out how we can solve the problems together. I speak to the churches, I speak to non-governmental organizations. Yesterday, as you know, I met the Chancellor of the University of Ghana. There are problems at UG. We'll try to solve those problems. So that is what keeps me going. And I do believe that over the last 9 months, I've been successful in identifying the problems and also, to a large extent, in identifying the measures which are needed to be put in place to cure or solve those problems. It's not a job that is complete, but I keep on keeping on.
Okay, if no follow-up from Anadia, you're free to go again, Godfrey.
So since the El Nino condition is being felt on a national scale, what are some of the immediate and long-term relief that the individual or the community and farmers can see happening?
Well, in the short term, we have mobilized the support of the Civil Defense Commission. And as I announced, we are going to be recruiting more volunteers to work with the Civil Defense Commission in areas to which water has to be delivered on an emergency basis, particularly drinking water. But on the middle term, in the middle term, we'll have to start thinking of building reservoirs in areas that are most likely to be affected by the El Nino phenomenon, which is cyclical. You may have 1 or 2 good years of normal weather and then El Nino comes back. As you know, it normally comes around Christmas time. That's why they call it El Nino. But in places like the Rupununi, which have been subject to terrible floods, Rupununi has had terrible flood. Now there's a terrible drought. We will have to create reservoirs so that we can store the water during rainy weather and use those reservoirs during dry weather. This is exactly what was done under the British on the coast, at Tapakuma, at Burisiri, at East Demerara, at MMA and Kanji, that we've stored water during the rainy season and used canals to take the fresh water into the fields to irrigate sugar, rice, and other crops during the dry season. And we have to consider that for other areas, particularly the savanna areas, the intermediate savannas in Berbice and the Rupununi savannas in Region 9. So we've got to really rethink the question of water storage and delivery of fresh water. Climate change is forever. Climate change is forever, so it's not going to go away in the middle term. It's going to be here for a very long time. So we have to think strategically, you're quite right, for the next 20, 30 years and start creating those reservoirs.
With local government elections around the corner, what would you like to say to the nation's youth who may not think they're ready to serve the nation?
I would say go forward and participate. The most important thing now is that we should have maximum participation. Most young people living today never voted in local government elections simply because we haven't had local government elections for over 2 decades, and young people now growing up don't fully understand or may not fully understand the complexity of the election. There's 71 different elections. Even persons who voted in the general and regional elections would find that that was a simple exercise. But the rules governing local government elections are much more stringent. People can only vote in their neighborhoods or the municipalities. There are 2 lists. One is on the first past the post system, one is on the PR system. Some people don't know the difference. So there needs to be more education, and it's a very short period of time. It's going to take place next month. What I would say to them is that they should not sit on their hands. They should go out, learn as much as possible about the process, because local government, local politics are really where it is at as far as they're concerned. As the saying goes, all politics is local. And if they want cleaner communities, safer communities, well lit, without any danger of water stagnation or mosquitoes, danger of crime and so on, they have to be involved in these elections. We regard local government system as being the cradle of government, and it's like an apprenticeship. If you intend to maybe go to the regional or national level, this is the place to start, at the municipality in your neighborhoods. So for all citizens, if they are concerned about the condition, the state of their communities, this is the first step. Not necessarily general and regional, but local government elections. They will be held under this administration every 3 years. So we wouldn't have this long gap as occurred between 1994 and 2016. It shouldn't recur. But my message to young people, to all people, is to go out, support your candidates, and ensure that your representative actually puts into practice the policies that you and the other residents of those communities would decide. That is what you're doing. You're electing people to represent your interests.
Okay. Godfrey.
Sir, what is likely to be an initiative to foster athlete development? I'm speaking in terms of sport because, sir, being a national athlete, there is not a lot, if any, initiative to foster development at the individual level. So what is likely to be an initiative of the government?
The initiative will start at the schools and communities. That is the level at which we want to start. In fact, I have already made public announcements, public statements that every single region should have a regional sports center. I personally have seen some, I would say, brilliant initiatives in very remote places in the hinterland. Villages would come together and they'd be hearty, but at the same time, serious competition. But that is where it starts, in the village, at village community centers, in the schools, at school sports, and then we can think of creating, facilities at the national and the regional level. But I would agree with you that much more has to be done to give support, top quality equipment, top quality coaches, top quality facilities. Many schools don't have sports coaches, they don't have sporting fields and places for them to practice. And even at the national level, we don't produce world-class athletes, but other countries like Jamaica and the Bahamas and Trinidad and Tobago have very good stadiums, and they encourage their athletes to perform at an international standard. So we have to start doing that, but you have to build from the bottom up. It wouldn't suddenly happen with adults. You have to train young people in the school system and in the villages.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have limited time left. Please choose your final questions wisely, beginning with you, Anadia.
Thank you, Malaika. Mr. President, how pleased are you with the transformation of the city, particularly the Durban site, as the nation gets ready to celebrate Mashramani and our Golden Jubilee of Independence?
Well, I think the entire population is quite happy. This comes at a time when there have been several severe, very serious risks, in terms of Zika and dengue and malaria. So by having the clean canals, it would help to eradicate, it would be easier to eradicate some of those disease-bearing mosquitoes. In addition to that, it's just unsightly. I think people feel more pleasant when they're open places where their children could walk and play, and better lit streets where people feel safer. Visitors don't want to come to a place which is full of garbage and looks lawless or disorderly. So from every point of view, from the point of view of health, from the point of view of feeling good, from the point of view of tourism, from the point of view of commercial efficiency, I think the transformation has had a good effect on Guyana. Even, for example, parking vehicles now. In the past, vehicles used to be parked in all sorts of haphazard ways. Now all the parking is fairly neat and the traffic is flowing much more smoothly. So I must compliment the Georgetown City Council. The reports that I have received, both from visitors and local residents, suggest that this is a good move, and I want to encourage them to continue. It is not just something for the 50th anniversary. This is the type of city people would want to live in. And I think when you travel overseas, you would see that Guyana was really far behind in terms of solid waste removal, stray dogs, and people carelessly leaving piles of sand at the roadside, vehicles badly parked. And people just feel good. They feel good about the monument, I see wedding parties posing by the Independence Monument. They feel good about coming to the city from the countryside. And that's part of the good life.
Godfrey.
Sir, what is the administration's policy on providing coverage for Parliament? I'm asking this because the Director of Public Information said that it is not GINA's job to provide coverage for the opposition. But when you look at it from a holistic perspective, both sides in Parliament makes up the legislative arm of government.
Well, I have said this before when I was in the opposition. The government is made up of three branches: the judicial branch, which interprets the laws, the legislative branch, which makes the laws, and the executive branch, which implements the laws. As far as I'm concerned, the government information services, the government news agency, must cover all three branches of the government: legislative, executive, and judicial. The people have to be better informed. And you cannot inform the people by depriving them of information. The people need to know. That is my policy, and I announced that policy when I was in the opposition, and I will maintain that policy now I'm in government. The government information service must serve all three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you, Anadia from the National Communications Network, NCN, and thank you very much, Godfrey Broomes from MTV News Update. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I'm Malika Ramsey. Do join us again next time.